It's a critical question facing the Democratic Party today, and whether Barack Obama likes it or not, he's smack in the middle of it. Who can be the party's voice as it aims to change the balance of power in Washington? In a revealing new interview, the former president tells The New Yorker he's chosen to be selective about jumping into the fray. Quote, "For me to function like Jon Stewart, even once a week, just going off, just ripping what was happening, which, by the way, I'm glad Jon's doing, then I'm not a political leader. I'm a commentator." But a lot of Democrats are clamoring for a lot more Obama, with the highest approval rating among all former presidents, 59% of Americans, and a mind-blowing 96% approval rating among Democrats from a Gallup survey last year. But that nostalgia for a different time, a presidency marked by economic recovery, the Affordable Care Act, the Paris Climate Accord, the Iran nuclear accord, and gay marriage legalized. Is it unrealistic to believe, to even think that could happen again? I want to bring in former Warren campaign senior advisor and campaign manager for Julian Castro, Maya Rupert. Also with us, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and MS Now political analyst Eugene Robinson. Eugene, it was fun going back and listening to old speeches from Barack Obama, as I did this morning. But I was thinking also that there's almost no place in political life where Donald Trump has not upended norms, including the role of a past president. Used to be kind of unspoken. After serving as leader of the free world, your time's up. You largely keep your opinions to yourself, right? But right. Do you think Democrats are right to want to hear from Obama more?
Well, I certainly understand the urge, but I do think President Obama is right in that he is right to worry about devaluing the impact of his voice when he does use that voice. And he doesn't, or he shouldn't become just a commentator, someone whose voice is more or less constantly out there. That would, I think, diminish the office of former president and diminish the impact of his voice. So he has to pick his shots. You can argue about when he chooses to speak and how he chooses to speak, but I think the basic instinct is right, that he should speak when he believes he can have the greatest impact. I don't think he's in any way unaware of what's going on with the Trump administration, of what a departure this is from American norms, and how urgent the situation is.
So, Maya, how should he use all that goodwill out there, all that popularity? What do you see as his role in leading the Democratic Party out of what most members seem to think is just the wilderness?
Well, I think I do agree. I think he's in a tough situation, because I agree it shouldn't just be a constant string of criticism. He should not become Jon Stewart. At the same time, I think there is space for political leadership in moments where what's needed is clear-headed, urging leaders to do the right thing in certain moments. And I think the tough part about Barack Obama as a leader is that the same thing that stops him from injecting his voice into a lot of these moments is maybe the same thing that says perhaps he shouldn't. That really what is needed right now is political leadership from a Democratic Party that was forged in this environment, that does appreciate that a lot of those norms, the same things that would say past presidents stay out of where we are right now, are just not the norms we're living by. And so I think in some ways, what he is signaling is maybe a willingness to cede that space to a new generation of leaders who say, yes, in a normal situation, maybe we have one president at a time. But when we have a president that is pushing us fast toward authoritarianism, we need a different set of rules. But I think in order to do that, we probably do need a different and newer set of leaders.
Eugene, I mentioned the speeches. The former president kind of harkens back to his farewell speech back in 2017, when he did this interview. I think today it now seems both prescient in kind of the need, but also maybe naive about the reality. Take a listen.
We all have to start with the premise that each of our fellow citizens loves this country just as much as we do, that they value hard work and family just like we do, that their children are just as curious and hopeful and worthy of love as our own.
I was there for that address. I remember vividly that kind of inkling of nervousness in the room for what might be ahead. But it almost seems quaint now, not fully understanding what was ahead. So my very simple question for you is, how did we go from there to here, and can we get back?
It just seems like such a different era, doesn't it? In a sense, that era was part of the old times. It reminded me, that speech reminded me so much of the speech that first put Barack Obama on the political map at that Democratic convention in which he gave that wonderful speech about there being no red America or blue America. There's only the United States of America. And that just seems really then, as opposed to now, what we thought of as extreme polarization when Obama left office now seems to be turbocharged to an entirely different realm. Now, are there words and actions that can bring back some of that can make Americans remember that we are all part of the same enterprise, that we all are Americans, and that we all are in it together? And I think that's an open question. I have to believe, because I'm a congenital optimist, that it's possible. But when and how, again, if I knew, I'd be doing it.
Yeah. I thought one of the fascinating parts of this, Maya, this interview, was asking if Trump was a repudiation of his presidency. And he said, no, actually, 60% of the country still agrees with me, so I don't take it personally. But it does remind me of the fact that if you have an activated and empowered right wing that first captures the Republican Party and then gets a hold of the federal government, that can do a lot of damage pretty quickly. So I wonder if the key question moving forward, Maya, is this: will the Trump presidency ultimately be a cautionary tale or a new roadmap to power?
I think it's going to be a cautionary tale for the Republican Party that is going to have to remake itself after this administration. One of the things that I think is interesting is so many of our conversations, we talk a lot about what have the Democrats learned? How are the Democrats going to move forward? The Republican Party is really at a crossroads. And I think that what we are seeing are the limits of Trump's ability to put together a coalition that really he was able to put together because he seems to be able to operate by a set of rules that don't really apply to anybody else. And I think it's a combination of the coalition he built, the fact that there have been way too many folks in the media who have given him sort of a different, sort of a double standard that he's been able to govern by, but no one else has gotten that. So moving forward, different Republicans are going to have to try to keep together a coalition that is incoherent, that doesn't work, that is already bursting at the seams. They are going to have to figure out, what does it mean to be in power after this? What is left of the party? And I think that is going to be the question that defines their party moving forward. And it's one that I think I'm not seeing enough people grapple with.
Maya Rupert, Eugene Robinson, an important conversation. Thank you both for having it.